You're telling me this worthless little waitress thinks she can play Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2? The words cut through the golden silence of the Plaza Hotel lobby like a blade, cruel and sharp, meant to humiliate. Every guest in that glittering palace of wealth turned their heads, eyes snapping toward the source of the insult. It was Theodore Harrington. 6 feet tall, wrapped in a $75,000 custom suit, steel gray eyes shining with disdain. He was not a man who inspired admiration through kindness. He demanded attention through sheer arrogance and the weight of his money. He stood there like a king who had just discovered a trespasser in his palace. And the trespasser was a black waitress. Serafina Williams sat stiffly on the velvet piano bench, her plain black dress still smelling faintly of coffee and kitchen grease. It wasn't elegance, it was her work uniform, a symbol of her long hours serving the rich who barely saw her as human. Her sneakers, scuffed and worn, looked almost shameful against the marble floor. But her hands, God, her hands, rested on the ivory keys like they belonged there. As if the piano had been waiting for her all along. Harrington sneered, circling her like a predator eyeing prey. If you can play this piece properly, I'll give you the keys to my Lamborghini Aventador. It's parked outside right now, $500,000 of engineering brilliance. He gestured toward the towering glass window, where the orange supercar glowed in the afternoon light like a sunbeam captured in metal. But when you fail, and we both know you will, you'll apologize to everyone in this room for wasting their time, and crawl back to whatever pitiful minimum wage life you came from. The crowd chuckled nervously. The wealthy guests sipped champagne. Staff froze in place. Even the concierge, normally unshakable, stood spellbound. A few phones were already raised, recording what promised to be a spectacular downfall. But Serafina didn't flinch. Her voice, quiet yet steady, broke through the air. And if I play it? Harrington's smirk deepened. Then the car is yours. His laugh echoed against the crystal chandeliers, arrogant and cruel. But that's not going to happen, is it? You're a waitress, not a pianist. The room went silent. Everyone waited for her to crack under his words. But Serafina's eyes stayed on the piano. Her grandmother's voice whispered in her mind, soft but unshakable. Music don't care about your bank account, baby girl. It only cares about your heart. Her fingers flexed above the keys. And when she looked up, fire burned in her dark eyes. Then watch me. And with that she pressed the first key. The sound burst into the air like a prayer breaking through chains. The opening notes of Rachmaninoff's concerto spilled out with raw, aching beauty. It wasn't just skill, it was soul. It was every sacrifice, every ignored dream, every night spent playing on her grandmother's battered old piano in a cramped Harlem apartment. Gasps filled the lobby. Conversations died. The super-rich who had come for entertainment were struck silent by something greater than money, something priceless. And Theodore Harrington, the billionaire who thought he owned the world, felt his smirk falter for the first time. Because this poor black waitress was about to change everything. If you're feeling the fire in this story already, make sure you're subscribed and tell us in the comments. What would you do if you were in Serafina's place standing up to a billionaire? Tomorrow we'll bring you another story of underdog courage that you won't want to miss. The moment the first chord rang through the air, the atmosphere inside the plaza shifted. It was no longer just a luxury hotel lobby, it was a battleground. Every note from the Steinway piano was a weapon. Every sound a declaration that the poor black waitress seated at the keys was not afraid to stand against wealth, arrogance, or mockery. Serafina's fingers glided across the ivory with startling precision. The music rose and fell like waves crashing on marble cliffs, sweeping through the hall, filling every corner. Guests who had come to show off their diamonds and tailored suits now sat frozen, their expressions softening in spite of themselves. At first, Theodore Harrington stood with a smug grin, arms crossed. But slowly his confidence faltered. His steel-gray eyes narrowed as the music grew more powerful, more haunting, impossible to ignore. He had expected clumsy banging on the keys, a moment of humiliation he could use to feed his ego. Instead, what poured out was mastery, something he hadn't seen in years. Whispers rippled across the crowd. Is she really a waitress? She plays like a concert pianist. This is unreal. From the corner of the lobby, Janet, the head waitress who had worked at the plaza for over 15 years, stood watching with trembling hands. She had known Serafina was special. She'd caught her humming to herself while polishing glasses, seen her rhythm even while carrying heavy trays. But this was a gift so extraordinary it belonged on the grandest stages of the world. "Sarah, baby, you don't have to do this," Janet had whispered earlier, her voice full of worry. But Serafina hadn't moved, hadn't wavered. And now, Janet's eyes filled with tears as the proof unfolded before everyone's eyes. The world had underestimated this young black woman. But for Serafina, the music was more than defiance. It was legacy. Each key carried the weight of 3 generations. Her great-grandmother, who had played jazz in smoky clubs during the Prohibition era, denied the recognition she deserved because of the color of her skin. Her grandmother, who had been turned away from Juilliard despite her genius, for the same reason. And her mother, who had abandoned her own dreams to provide for her child. All of their voices were inside this music, alive through her. The billionaire circled the piano slowly, his Rolex glinting beneath the chandeliers, but his eyes betrayed him. The smirk had faded, replaced by something unsettled. He was used to boardrooms, to hostile takeovers, to crushing enemies with money and power. But this music, it reached into places he hadn't allowed himself to feel in decades. Still, his arrogance pushed forward. "You know," Theodore said loudly, his voice dripping with contempt, "I'm actually doing you a favor. Dreams don't pay rent. I started with nothing too, but I was smart enough to live in the real world, not in fantasies. This performance? It's worthless. You'll see." But his words fell flat. No one believed him anymore, not with the evidence vibrating through the air. Among the crowd, one man leaned forward, his trained ear catching details others missed. Harrison Cole, a music producer staying at the plaza while scouting new talent, felt his heart race. He'd heard her humming while carrying dishes the day before, and it had stopped him mid-conversation. Now, hearing her at the piano, he was certain, this wasn't just skill. This was divine. Serafina's body swayed slightly with the melody, eyes closed, surrendering herself to the music. She wasn't playing for Harrington. She wasn't playing for the Lamborghini gleaming outside. She was playing for her grandmother, for her mother, for every black artist silenced or ignored. Every note was a rebellion. Every chord was justice. Gasps escaped from the crowd as the music swelled into the most complex passages of the concerto. The treacherous runs, the impossible hand crossings, things that had ended the dreams of countless aspiring pianists, flowed from her effortlessly. "This isn't possible," someone whispered, phone raised, recording every second. "She's perfect." And then something happened that shocked them all. Theodore Harrington, the billionaire who mocked her, who prided himself on crushing dreams, felt his throat tighten. His eyes burned. A tear slipped down his cheek before he even realized it. For the first time in years he was undone. The music broke through his carefully constructed armor. It reached the part of him that had once loved beauty before money, once cared for art before profit. It dragged him back to his childhood, to the boy who had sat at his mother's old piano until his father's booming voice declared, "Real men don't waste time on pretty sounds. They make money." He staggered, gripping a marble column for support. Meanwhile, Harrison Cole leaned closer, whispering to no one in particular, "I've worked with prodigies, with Grammy winners, with geniuses who've played since they were 3 years old. But this," his voice cracked with awe, "this is something else entirely." The lobby was no longer just a hotel entrance. It had become a cathedral. The guests were no longer spectators but worshippers, caught in the spell of music that was more powerful than wealth, status, or ego. And at the center sat the poor black waitress, transforming the world with every note. The music poured from the piano like fire and water combined, fierce yet fluid, unstoppable. The poor black waitress who moments earlier had been mocked and dismissed now held the power of the entire room in her hands. Every guest, every staff member, every single person in the plaza's marble lobby was silent, caught in her spell. Theodore Harrington's smirk was gone. The billionaire's jaw clenched as he fought emotions he hadn't allowed himself to feel in decades. His gray eyes, usually hard as steel, reflected something raw, something unsettled. He had come here to humiliate her. Instead, he was being stripped bare by the very thing he had ridiculed. Serafina's fingers moved with flawless control, but her playing was more than technique. It was life itself. It was the sound of long nights in a Harlem apartment, pressing keys on her grandmother's broken piano until her fingertips were raw. It was the weight of a mother who had given up her dreams for survival, and of ancestors whose music had been silenced by prejudice. Every note carried their voices. Every chord shouted the truth: she was not small. She was not worthless. She was not invisible. The crowd was transfixed. Phones recorded the moment, but even through shaky screens, those watching would later swear it didn't feel like a performance. It felt like a revelation. Janet, standing at the entrance to the restaurant, clutched her hands to her chest. Tears rolled down her cheeks. She had known Serafina was gifted, but this was beyond her imagination. "She's been hiding this the whole time," Janet whispered to the sous chef beside her. "Working doubles, paying bills, caring for her grandmother, and inside her was this." The billionaire's face was pale now. He had thought himself untouchable, a king in a world of money. But the music was undoing him. It wasn't just beautiful, it was surgical, cutting through the walls he had built around himself. Memories flooded him. He was 7 again, sitting at a piano, smiling with wonder, until his father's harsh words turned joy into shame. He remembered the day he walked away from music forever, choosing numbers and profit over sound and soul. And then the memory of his ex-wife's last words stabbed at him: "You've never created anything beautiful, Theodore. You only know how to destroy." The sound of Rachmaninoff's concerto was proving her right. It was beauty, pure and undeniable, coming not from him, but from the waitress he had tried to humiliate. He whispered under his breath, "Stop." But the music didn't stop. It swelled louder, carrying him with it, tearing apart everything he thought he was. The crowd noticed his struggle. Some exchanged glances. Some smiled faintly, satisfied to see arrogance humbled. And yet no one dared move. Harrison Cole, the music producer, felt his pulse quicken. His instincts screamed at him. This was once in a lifetime. This wasn't just skill, this was history unfolding. He whispered, almost reverently, "She isn't just playing Rachmaninoff, she's channeling something higher." Serafina's eyes were closed now. Her body swayed gently, not with showmanship but with surrender. She wasn't performing for them. She wasn't performing for him. She was performing for her family, for herself, for the legacy that had been denied generations of women before her. The crescendo built, fierce and unrelenting. Her hands blurred as they crossed the keys, striking chords with precision and grace. The audience leaned forward collectively, breathless, as if one wrong note could break the spell. And then, just for an instant, her left hand trembled. A single note faltered. Gasps echoed through the lobby. The sound was tiny, fleeting, but in the perfection of what had come before, it rang out like a thunderclap. Serafina's heart pounded. She could feel Theodore's eyes on her, waiting for her to fail. Waiting to seize that moment. Her grandmother's voice rang in her mind again: "Music don't care about mistakes, baby girl. It only cares about your heart." She steadied herself. Her fingers recovered. And with renewed fire, she launched into the most treacherous passage of the concerto. Notes cascaded like silver rain, fast, sharp, pure. The audience erupted in whispers. She recovered. My God, she didn't even break. Theodore staggered backward, collapsing into a velvet armchair. His arrogance had vanished completely, his body trembling under the force of the music. For the first time in his adult life he looked powerless. Serafina, the poor black waitress he had intended to humiliate, was the one holding dominion now. But just as the music reached its peak, something shifted in Theodore's face. His lips parted. His eyes widened in disbelief, staring not at her face, but at her hands. The crowd, sensing something strange, followed his gaze. And then, in a broken whisper, barely audible above the music, he said, "The birthmark, on your left hand. Between your thumb and forefinger. Star-shaped." Serafina's eyes snapped open. Her heart froze. How could he know that? The music faltered again, but this time it wasn't nerves. It was shock. Her grandmother had always said that tiny star-shaped mark made her special. But only family knew. Family, and strangers who had no business knowing it. Her fingers quivered on the keys. The music clashed into silence, the sudden stop as violent as a scream. The billionaire took a shaky step forward, eyes fixed on her trembling hand. His voice cracked as he said words that stunned the entire lobby into stunned silence. 24 years ago, I was with a woman. A music student. Brilliant. Beautiful. Her name was Melody Williams. Serafina's breath caught in her throat. The world tilted on its axis. "That's my mother's name," she whispered. The crowd erupted in gasps. Phones shot higher, recording every second. Theodore's voice broke completely. "She was pregnant when I left for Silicon Valley. I was young. Stupid. I thought I had to choose between love and success, and I chose wrong." The piano keys beneath Serafina's fingers blurred through her tears. Her world had shifted. The man who had mocked her, humiliated her, challenged her worth, was claiming to be her father. Can you imagine standing there, proving your talent, and the billionaire who tried to destroy you suddenly claims he's your father? What would you do if you were Serafina in that moment? Tell us in the comments and subscribe to stay with us for the next shocking turn in this story. The silence that followed was heavier than the grand chandeliers overhead. Every person in the plaza lobby froze, their breaths caught as though the world itself had stopped moving. The only sound was the faint hum of the piano strings still vibrating from the sudden halt of the music. Serafina stared at him, this billionaire who had mocked her, insulted her, and dangled his Lamborghini keys like she was some circus act. Her body trembled, not from fear but from rage and disbelief. "You think you can humiliate me," she hissed, her voice cutting through the hush like glass shattering, "and then claim to be my father when I prove you wrong?" Theodore Harrington stepped closer, desperation replacing arrogance. His face, usually composed in cold superiority, now carried cracks, shame, sorrow, panic. His hands trembled as he reached toward her, but he stopped himself as though afraid to touch. "Sarah?" His voice cracked on the name like it hurt to speak. "Please. That lullaby you hummed yesterday, while you served me coffee. I wrote it. I wrote it for Melody when we were young, when we were in love. I haven't heard it in 24 years. The words hit her like a physical blow. Her knees weakened. That lullaby, the one her mother had sung to her every night, it wasn't just a song. It was his. Gasps broke through the crowd. Phones shook as people tried to capture every second of this revelation. Guests whispered frantically, too stunned to contain themselves. "No!" Serafina's voice trembled with fury as she shot up from the piano bench. Her eyes blazed, her chest heaving. "Don't you dare. Don't you dare call me that. Only people who loved me, who stood by me, get to call me Sarah. You don't deserve it." Theodore's face collapsed as though her words had cut deeper than any knife. "Please," he whispered. "I know what I did. I was young, I was afraid. I made the wrong choice. I left." "You left," she roared, her voice echoing against the marble walls. "My mother worked 3 jobs while pregnant because the man who claimed to love her decided his dreams were more important than his family. She never told me your name, but she cried sometimes, quietly, when she thought I wasn't listening. She'd whisper that you chose money over love." Tears poured down her cheeks now, her voice breaking under the weight of 2 decades of abandonment. "Do you know what it's like to grow up hearing your mother weep for a man who walked away? Do you know what it's like to starve while she worked herself to death? Do you know what it's like to watch her die in a charity ward because we couldn't afford better treatment while you," her voice cracked into fury, "while you were buying Lamborghinis and suits worth more than our rent?" The lobby shook with her words. Guests covered their mouths. Some turned away, unable to watch the raw pain tearing through her. Others couldn't look away, their eyes glued to the collapse of a family in front of them. Theodore's legs buckled. He sank to his knees on the polished marble floor, his expensive suit rumpled, his proud image crumbling. Tears streamed freely down his face, mixing with the broken words he could barely form. I didn't know. I didn't know she was pregnant. Oh God, I'm sorry. I thought success would make me worthy. I thought." "Don't you dare justify it," Serafina shouted, her voice trembling with rage. She slammed her hand onto the piano keys, creating a discordant crash that made everyone flinch. "You don't get to rewrite the past. You don't get to walk in here, mock me, tear me down, and then try to claim me because I play the piano like her." The crowd pressed closer, phones capturing every raw, agonizing second. This was no longer a performance. It was a reckoning. Janet rushed forward, her voice frantic. "Honey, maybe you should." "No." Serafina cut her off, stepping backward, her whole body shaking. Her voice was hoarse, broken, but unstoppable. "You all got your show, didn't you? The poor black waitress who dared to play piano. The billionaire who mocked her, only to find out she's his daughter. What a pretty little story." Her laugh was bitter, sharp, and full of pain. "Except fairy tales aren't real. They never were. Do you want to know the cruelest part? Every time I hummed that lullaby, I was carrying your melody inside me. A piece of the man who abandoned us. Theodore collapsed fully, his knees against the marble, his hands covering his face. His voice came out as a broken prayer. I'm sorry, God. I'm so sorry. But Serafina had already turned away. Her tears blurred the grand lobby as she pushed through the crowd, shoving open the heavy glass doors into the cold New York night. The orange Lamborghini gleamed at the curb, but she didn't even glance at it. It meant nothing. Time, love, a mother's life, those were things no amount of money could buy back. And for the first time in her life, Serafina Williams, the poor black waitress who had carried everyone's weight on her shoulders, walked away not just from a piano, but from the shadow of a man who had destroyed her childhood before it began. The October wind clawed at Serafina's thin dress as she stumbled into Central Park, her vision blurred with tears. She collapsed onto a wooden bench, her body racked with sobs that came from deeper than grief. They came from decades of abandonment, poverty, and the unbearable truth she had just learned. Her breath formed white clouds in the freezing night air. She wrapped her arms around herself, but no embrace could shield her from the storm inside. Back at the plaza, Theodore Harrington remained on his knees, his tailored suit wrinkled and stained with tears. The once untouchable billionaire now looked like a broken man stripped of everything but regret. The lobby had emptied slowly, guests were too shaken to stay. Even the staff retreated, leaving the titan of industry alone with his guilt. Only two people remained who refused to leave. Janet, her eyes still wet, stood silently in the shadows, her heart torn between loyalty to the young black waitress who had just fled and the strange pity she now felt for the man who had shattered her. And Harrison Cole, the music producer, stood at the edge of the lobby, his sharp mind working quickly. He hadn't just witnessed a performance, he had witnessed destiny. Harrison turned to Janet. I need to know everything about her, he said, his voice urgent. Her mother, her past, her story. Because I think I know how to help her, but I need the truth. Janet hesitated. She had guarded Serafina's privacy for years. But something in Harrison's eyes, his sincerity, his awe, made her nod slowly. Her mother's name was Melody. Strongest woman I ever knew. She raised Serafina alone, worked herself to the bone. But every night she'd sit at that old piano and play. Said music was the only thing that could heal a broken heart. Theodore lifted his head at the sound of Melody's name. His lips trembled. Did she ever mention me? Janet's eyes narrowed. She didn't need to. We all knew. She'd play a lullaby sometimes. Said it reminded her that love was real, even when it didn't last. Theodore buried his face in his hands again, his voice hoarse. Oh God, I thought she forgot me. I thought, his voice broke. I thought my success would mean something. But it cost me everything that mattered. Meanwhile, 3 blocks away, Harrison finally found Serafina still sitting on the park bench, her shoulders shaking. He approached carefully, not wanting to intrude. Serafina? His voice was soft. My name is Harrison Cole. I heard what happened. She lifted her face, her eyes swollen and red. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. What now? You come to offer me a record deal? Sorry. I'm done with music. It only brings pain. Harrison sat down beside her, the autumn leaves crunching beneath his shoes. He shook his head. No. Music doesn't bring pain. Life does. Music heals. She turned away, her jaw tight. You don't know anything about my life. I know more than you think, he said gently. I called my assistant earlier. We did some digging. Your mother, Melody Williams, she was brilliant. Did you know she was offered a full scholarship to Juilliard? She could have had the career you just proved you're capable of. But she gave it up, for love, for family. For you. Serafina's breath caught. Her hands trembled in her lap. She never told me that. She wrote music too. Beautiful pieces. And 24 years ago she wrote something special. A song called My Heart Remembers. It was about a love that survives time, mistakes, even betrayal. He pulled out his phone and pressed play. A soft, haunting voice filled the cold air. Melody Williams, young, full of hope, singing words about forgiveness and second chances. Serafina gasped. Her mother's voice, alive again right there in the park. Her chest tightened as tears rolled freely down her cheeks. She forgave him, she whispered. Even after everything, she forgave him. Harrison nodded. And she left something else. A letter. She gave it to a lawyer with instructions to deliver it if Theodore Harrington ever came back into her life, or if something happened to her. The lawyer has been looking for you since she passed. He pulled a yellowed envelope from his coat pocket. Her mother's handwriting scrawled across the front made Serafina's heart seize. With trembling fingers she tore it open. Her tears blurred the words, but her mother's voice lived in every line. My dearest Sarah, if you are reading this, then I am gone. And somehow, impossibly, your father has returned. I know you must be angry, angrier than I ever was. But let me tell you a secret about love, my beautiful daughter. True love isn't about never making mistakes. It's about having the courage to find your way back home. Serafina pressed the paper to her chest, sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. Her mother's final words wrapped around her like an embrace. Forgive him, Sarah. Not because he deserves it, but because you deserve freedom from anger. Let music heal what words cannot fix. Play our lullaby one more time, with love. Harrison sat silently beside her, giving her the space to break. The autumn night was bitterly cold, but inside her, a different warmth began to stir. For the first time since the lobby, Serafina lifted her head. Her eyes were still wet, her heart still torn, but her mother's words echoed louder than her pain. I have to go back, she whispered. Harrison smiled faintly. I was hoping you'd say that. And I know exactly what needs to happen next. What would you do if you discovered a letter from a parent who passed away, asking you to forgive the person who broke your heart? Could you? Tell us in the comments. And stay with us because in the next chapter, Serafina makes a choice that will leave everyone speechless. The plaza's lobby had grown quiet again, but not for long. Word had spread across social media that something extraordinary had happened inside, that a poor black waitress had stunned the room with her talent, and that a billionaire had broken down, claiming to be her father. By the time Serafina stepped back through the golden revolving doors, escorted gently by Harrison, the lobby was already filling again. Strangers, guests, curious onlookers. They had all come to witness the ending of a story that had unfolded like no other. Phones were ready, whispers electric. Theodore Harrington stood by the grand piano, looking like a ghost of himself. His once flawless suit was wrinkled, his face pale and streaked with tears. For a man who had built his life on power, intimidation, and arrogance, he now looked small, stripped of everything but shame. And then he saw her. Serafina walked slowly across the marble floor, her mother's letter clutched in her hand. The crowd hushed instantly, as if even the chandeliers leaned closer to listen. She loved you, Serafina said, her voice steady though her eyes still glistened with tears. Even at the end she loved you. Theodore's lips parted. His voice cracked as he whispered, I loved her too. I never stopped. And you? His throat tightened. God, you look just like her when you smile. Serafina stopped at the piano bench. Her knees trembled, but her mother's words rang in her head. Forgive him, Sarah. Not because he deserves it, but because you deserve to be free. She sat down slowly, her hands hovering above the ivory keys. Then she looked up at him. She wanted me to play the lullaby one more time. With love. Theodore's breath caught. His legs nearly gave out beneath him. For a moment he looked like a child again, stripped of everything but hope. Serafina's fingers pressed the first key. The melody flowed softly into the lobby, familiar and haunting. It was the same tune she had hummed countless times, the same lullaby her mother had sung to her as a child, the same song that had lived in her heart without her ever knowing it was her father's creation. And then, something no one expected happened. Theodore began to sing. His voice was rusty, shaky from years of silence, but the words poured out as if they had been waiting for this moment. Little star shining bright, dance with angels through the night. When the world feels dark and cold, remember love will make you bold. Gasps filled the lobby. Dozens of phones caught the moment as Theodore, the cold billionaire who had once destroyed dreams, sang with his daughter for the first time in his life. Serafina's throat closed, her vision blurred, but she didn't stop playing. Her voice joined his in the second verse, soft at first, then growing stronger, richer. Their harmonies blended together like they had been singing all their lives instead of minutes. The crowd was silent. No one dared interrupt what felt sacred. And when the final note faded into the golden light, Theodore dropped to his knees beside the piano bench. Tears streamed freely down his face as he looked up at her. I know I can't buy back 24 years, he whispered. "But if you'll let me, I want to spend whatever time I have left being the father you deserved all along." The entire lobby held its breath. Serafina's lips trembled. Her chest rose and fell. She looked down at him, at the man who had abandoned her mother, who had humiliated her only hours earlier, who had broken her heart just by existing. But she also saw the man her mother had loved. The man who had written a lullaby. The man who was now stripped of power, begging not for forgiveness but for a chance. Tears blurred her eyes as she whispered, "I'd like that too, Dad." The words hung in the air like magic. And for the first time in her life, Serafina Williams didn't feel like just a poor black waitress. She felt like a daughter. 10 months later, the golden lights of Carnegie Hall bathed the crowd in warmth and anticipation. Every seat was filled. The chatter was electric, a mixture of excitement and reverence. People had not only come for a concert, they had come for her. On the stage, hidden just behind the velvet curtain, Serafina Williams stood in a gown of midnight blue. It was her mother's dress, carefully preserved and altered to fit her perfectly. As her hands smoothed the fabric, she felt Melody's presence with her. Her heart raced, but her mother's words whispered in her mind, "The music knows the way even when we don't." She stepped forward and the crowd erupted in applause. The ovation wasn't just for her talent, it was for her journey, for the story that had captured millions of hearts. Clips of her confrontation in the Plaza Hotel had gone viral months earlier. 50 million people had watched a poor black waitress defy a billionaire with nothing but her gift. But tonight, she was no longer just a waitress. Tonight, she was an artist standing on one of the world's most celebrated stages. In the front row sat Theodore Harrington. No longer the untouchable titan of industry, no longer the man who mocked and crushed dreams. He sat as a father, his eyes wet with pride. His once flawless exterior had softened. The arrogance that used to define him had melted away. Tonight he wasn't a billionaire. He was a man grateful for a second chance. Beside him sat Melody's mother, Serafina's grandmother. She had lived long enough to see her granddaughter's dreams bloom, and the glow in her eyes was brighter than the chandeliers overhead. And standing just off stage was Harrison Cole. He had kept his promise. After that night at the plaza, he vowed Serafina's talent would never again be hidden in the shadows of restaurants or drowned out by the arrogance of the wealthy. Tonight was only the beginning. Serafina lowered herself onto the piano bench, her fingers hovering above the Steinway keys. The hall hushed instantly as if the building itself was holding its breath. She began, not with Rachmaninoff, not with another composer's masterpiece, but with something of her own. A piece she had written in the months after her mother's letter found her. A piece she titled The Music of Coming Home. The melody flowed like a river of memory. Fragments of the lullaby her father had written decades earlier wove through her composition, transformed into something new, something bigger. It was a song of grief, of survival, of forgiveness, and of triumph. It was the sound of generations of women whose dreams had been silenced, but who had finally found their voice in her. The audience was spellbound. Some cried openly. Others closed their eyes, letting the music carry them to places words could never reach. Theodore's shoulders shook as tears rolled freely down his cheeks. He heard his own melody, the lullaby he had written as a young man, echoing inside her new creation. But in her hands it wasn't his anymore. It was theirs. Father and daughter, mother and grandmother, all bound together in sound. When the final notes faded, the audience rose to its feet in thunderous applause. The sound shook the walls, but Serafina sat still, her chest heaving, tears slipping silently down her face. She looked directly at her father in the front row. Through the roar of applause, she mouthed two simple words that made his heart soar. "Thank you." "What do you think?" The waitress who once served drinks in silence is now filling Carnegie Hall with music. Isn't that proof that no dream is ever too small and no beginning too humble? Share your thoughts in the comments and don't miss the next chapter, because Serafina's rise is only the beginning of her legacy. The applause at Carnegie Hall thundered like a storm. People shouted her name, their voices filled with awe. The poor black waitress who once carried trays through the plaza's dining hall had transformed into a woman commanding the world's greatest stage. Serafina rose from the piano bench, bowing gracefully, though her heart was still pounding. For years she had dreamed of this moment, though she never believed it could come true. And yet, here she was, not because of luck, not because of privilege, but because of resilience, sacrifice, and the unshakable power of music. As she stepped back from the spotlight, she caught sight of her father. Theodore Harrington sat in the front row, tears streaking his face, his hands raw from clapping. He looked different now, not because of the suit he wore or the wealth he still possessed, but because of the humility in his eyes. He had been broken by her music that day in the plaza, stripped of arrogance and forced to face the man he had become. Since then he had worked relentlessly to change. He had created the Melody Williams Foundation, named after the woman he lost, dedicated to providing music education and health care for struggling families. It was his way of honoring Melody's memory and repaying a debt he knew could never truly be paid. For Theodore, the applause wasn't just for his daughter, it was redemption, a reminder that even the cruelest mistakes could lead back to love if you had the courage to change. Backstage, Harrison Cole beamed with pride. He had seen countless musicians rise and fall, but Serafina was different. She didn't just play music, she embodied it. She was proof that art, born in poverty and pain, could rise above and conquer the coldest hearts. Reporters swarmed as she stepped off stage. Cameras flashed, microphones were thrust forward, voices called out. How does it feel to go from waitress to Carnegie Hall? What message do you want to give young women watching tonight? What's next for you, Serafina? She smiled through her exhaustion. Dreams don't have expiration dates, she said simply. They just wait for the right moment to bloom. The quote would make headlines the next morning. But even as she basked in the glow of her triumph, Serafina knew this wasn't just her story. It was her mother's. It was her grandmother's. It was every black woman who had been silenced, ignored, or underestimated. Tonight, their voices had filled Carnegie Hall through her. Later at the reception, a small voice tugged at her gown. Serafina turned to see a little black girl no older than 9, clutching a worn music book. Her eyes were wide, her hands trembling. Miss Williams? I mean Miss Harrington, the girl stammered shyly. I play piano too. But my family says it's just a hobby. After hearing your story, do you think dreams really can come true? Serafina knelt to meet her at eye level, her smile tender and full of understanding. Let me tell you a secret, she whispered, just as her mother once had. Dreams don't disappear. They just wait for the right person to believe in them. If you love music, then yes, your dream can come true. And one day, maybe I'll be sitting in the front row watching you play on this stage. The girl's eyes shone with hope, and her small nod carried more power than any applause. Across the room, Theodore watched the exchange with glistening eyes. For the first time, he understood the true meaning of wealth. It wasn't the cars, the companies, or the millions in his bank account. It was this, the ability to leave behind something that mattered. And in that moment he made a vow. His fortune would no longer be a monument to himself, but a bridge for others like Serafina, for children with dreams bigger than their circumstances. The Melody Williams Foundation would grow, not as a trophy, but as a living testament to the woman he lost and the daughter he almost never knew. And as Serafina looked across the reception room, surrounded by love, admiration, and possibility, she knew her story was no longer just hers. It belonged to everyone who had ever been told they were less, everyone who had ever been silenced, everyone who had ever believed that poverty meant the end of their dreams. Because tonight, a poor black waitress had proved them all wrong. The months that followed her Carnegie Hall debut were nothing short of a whirlwind. News outlets couldn't get enough of her story, the poor black waitress who had gone from serving cocktails at the plaza to commanding one of the greatest stages in the world. Interviews, features, and magazine covers flooded in, each one retelling the tale that millions already knew by heart. But what kept people talking wasn't just her music, it was her humanity. Serafina didn't let fame polish away her truth. She spoke openly about her mother's struggles, about growing up in poverty, about working endless shifts while her real talent stayed hidden. She reminded the world that brilliance is not limited to the wealthy, that genius can rise from the most unexpected places. Her words resonated across the nation. In schools, teachers shared her story to inspire students who felt invisible. In churches, pastors spoke of her as a living example of resilience and forgiveness. On social media, young women called her a beacon of black excellence. And through it all, she never forgot her mother's final letter. Every performance she gave carried the weight of Melody's voice, urging her to forgive, to let music heal. Theodore Harrington walked that path too. His days of ruthless ambition were behind him. He no longer cared for headlines about his company or his fortune. His name now appeared in the news for different reasons: donations to community centers, scholarships for underprivileged musicians, investments in hospitals and schools. But his greatest project was the Melody Williams Foundation. At its heart, the foundation created music programs in neighborhoods where opportunity was scarce. Old pianos were restored, teachers were hired, and children who had never touched an instrument before were given a chance to discover their own voices. For Theodore, it wasn't about erasing the past, because nothing could erase the choices he had made. It was about building a future that honored the woman he lost and the daughter who had forgiven him. And Serafina stood beside him, not as his charity case, not as proof of his redemption, but as his partner in change. Together they visited schools, shaking hands with children who reminded her of herself. Wide-eyed kids with small hands that barely reached the keys, who looked up at her as though she were proof that miracles still existed. One day during a visit to a community center in Harlem, Serafina sat at an old upright piano, the kind her grandmother once played. A crowd of children pressed close, eager to hear. She didn't play Rachmaninoff or her own compositions. She played the lullaby. Their voices rose with hers, small and imperfect but filled with joy. For the first time she understood fully what her mother meant. Music doesn't care about your bank account. It only cares about your heart. That night she told Theodore, This is the real Lamborghini. This is the prize that matters." He nodded, tears shining in his eyes. For a man who once measured his worth by wealth, he now understood that true riches were found in moments like these. But even as her life transformed, Serafina remained grounded. She still walked the streets of Harlem, still visited her grandmother's old apartment, still greeted the waitstaff at the plaza whenever she returned. She reminded herself, that no matter how far she rose, she had once been the girl no one believed in. And because of that, she vowed never to let another young woman with a gift be ignored, silenced, or mocked the way she had been. Her story was no longer just hers. It was a torch she carried for others. Do you think Serafina's greatest gift was her music, or the way she used it to change lives? Share your answer in the comments. The night air outside Carnegie Hall was crisp and alive with celebration. Camera crews, reporters, and fans flooded the steps, their flashes lighting up the city like stars. Serafina Williams Harrington stood at the center of it all, draped in her midnight gown, smiling through tears as she signed programs and hugged strangers who thanked her for inspiring them. But even in the chaos, her thoughts drifted back to her mother. Melody's face, her voice, her lullaby, it was all alive in her tonight. Everything she had achieved was because of the sacrifices Melody had made, the love she had given, the faith she had held even when life was cruel. Nearby, Theodore Harrington lingered at the edge of the crowd, no longer commanding attention like he once did in boardrooms and banquets. He didn't need to. The way he looked at his daughter, with pride, humility, and reverence, said more than any headline could. The orange Lamborghini that had once been the centerpiece of his arrogance sat parked quietly nearby. The car that was supposed to be a prize for humiliation now looked like a relic of a past that no longer mattered. Serafina had accepted it once, but only to donate it to charity. Some prizes, she had said, are too small for dreams this big. Her real prize was the moment she was living now. Inside the reception hall, Janet had been flown in as an honored guest. She beamed as she watched Serafina shine. "That's my girl," she whispered proudly. For 15 years, Janet had worked alongside her, watched her struggle, shielded her when she could. To see her rise this high was more than pride, it was vindication. As the night wound down, a quiet moment came when Serafina slipped away from the crowd. She found herself alone in the empty hall, the Steinway piano still sitting center stage, bathed in soft light. She ran her fingers across the keys and a shiver ran through her. This was no longer the plaza lobby. This was no longer humiliation. This was no longer survival. This was triumph. She began to play the lullaby again, softly, just for herself. The notes rose like whispers, filling the empty hall. Her eyes closed, and for a moment she felt her mother beside her. Behind her, she heard a faint voice humming along. She turned. It was Theodore, standing in the shadows, his voice breaking as he joined her. For the first time there was no audience, no cameras, no performance. Just father and daughter, rebuilding something they both thought was lost forever. When the final note faded, silence wrapped around them like a blessing. Serafina looked at him and said quietly, "Mama was right. Music remembers what the heart forgets." Theodore's throat tightened. "Then let's promise never to forget again." She smiled faintly, her tears shining like jewels in the dim light. "Deal." Months later, her words would be etched in marble at the entrance of the Melody Williams Foundation. Dreams don't disappear. They just wait for the right moment to bloom. And from Harlem to Los Angeles, from small towns to big cities, children who once had no access to instruments now played freely. They carried the torch she had lit, their laughter and music echoing in places once filled with silence. Serafina's story had gone viral, yes. But more importantly, it had planted seeds of hope in countless lives. She was no longer just the poor black waitress who shocked a billionaire in the plaza. She was proof that resilience, legacy, and love could transform even the most broken beginnings. And as her hands pressed one final time against the piano keys, she whispered into the quiet hall, "Thank you, Mama. This was for you."